now I get to talk to somebody that I haven't seen. We were just guessing that it's about 8 years ago. And that's Zelda la Grange. And so nice to see you again.
Thank you, Stuart. You too. Thank you for having me.
Well, I thought that what better time than the reading, which I've just completed, of your latest book. Let's try and hold it up. What Nelson Mandela Taught Me, and the subtitle, Timeless Lessons on Leadership and Life. And what a great time to do it. And it's obviously a deep labor of love.
Yes, thanks, Stuart. Yeah, it took me the better part of 10 years to write it, because it was a difficult process of me revisiting some of the, things that things that I may have been uneasy with before. So it's taken time, but at the end of the day, I had to. It's a process that I had to work through, and I'm happy with the end result, and hope that people will be able to take something from my experiences that will be helpful to them.
I'm guessing that you must have kept very detailed diaries. Was that part of your everyday routine?
Well, I was working with Madiba, definitely not. There wasn't time to keep diaries. So, I rely on my memory going through his diary, his old diary. So, that gives some reference. And that's also why I felt that I needed to write the second book, because some of the things are slipping. And as we get older, I'm sure I'll get stories mixed up. So it was important for me to do this now while I'm still in a position to remember things with clarity.
Yeah, I think I've learned that it's presumptuous to assume that anybody thinks the way we do, or remembers the things that we do, or knows what we know. So I just want to do a little bit of memory chasing for those who are watching this. How was it that you got to work with him in the first place?
In 1994, I applied for a job in his office, in President Mandela's office, in October of that year. So it was shortly after he became president. And then I ended up working. The job that I applied for was in another office, a ministry within the presidency. And then on the day of the interview, it just happened that his private secretary at the time, Miriam Cladana, was looking for an assistant, and I ended up working for her. I didn't have any intentions of ending up in the personal stuff of the president, but they say life doesn't give you what you want, but what you need. So that's where my career with him started, and it ended up in this life-changing experience.
I don't think it would be unfair to also recall that you grew up in a family which was deeply embedded in the bad South Africa that we now recall, with some horror at times. So an Afrikaans family. I'm assuming that your parents wouldn't have been over the moon about you starting to work for him.
No, yes, it was the whole community. I mean, if you grew up in apartheid, as a white South African, the people of my age will relate that we followed apartheid happily, because there was no alternative. Everything was highly censored. So there was no Google or alternative media, as I say, where you could delve into facts. So you get indoctrinated and brainwashed from a very early age. And when I announced that I got the job, my father's only response was, "Oh, nothing else." So it was a hard journey for them as well, because despite their ideology, of course, when I reported that I met the president for the first time, and he was kind and courteous and respectful, undeservingly so, that intrigued my parents, because now, despite their ideology, it's now you're talking about their child, and their child is having this experience, and a believable experience, because it's your child. So the whole process and my journey with Mr. Mandela also had an influence on my parents, and also our bigger community, their circle of friends and so on. Everyone has been impacted in some way because of my experiences.
Can you remember the first time they met him?
the first time they met him, Stuart, was I think and I describe it in this book. I think it was the first time my father actually met him was at the airport one night in Cape Town when we arrived about an hour late, and
I remember.
President Mandela insisted on having tea or coffee with my dad at about 10 o'clock at night on a Friday evening, and it was raining, but President Mandela just wanted to apologize for my father, for the fact that we were late and he had to wait for an hour because of our delay in Johannesburg. So that was the first time they met, and I could see that my father was very uncomfortable. Of course, I cannot deny that, but also intrigued by this person because all the things that we were taught and told about him were immediately when you met him, you realized that all these things were wrong and they were untrue. So it was an emotional experience, I think, even for my dad at that point, because it is so against the grain of what we were brought up and made to believe.
And I suppose he could only have been putting on his best performance to impress your dad for so long. You can't go on doing that. And why would he do it in the first place?
No, absolutely. They had lunch with him one afternoon, Stuart, after Madiba retired, and he could choose one person to work in retirement with him from the presidency. And Madiba then, of course, chose me, which I still consider the biggest honor of my life. But they had lunch with him, and it was very uncomfortable because my father, his personality didn't change, and he was untactful, and you can't erase prejudice and bias, in a couple of months or a couple of years. It's a process that takes a very long time. And at this lunch, my father was being his untactful self. And I kept kicking him under the table, and making face at him. And he would ask me, why are you kicking me? And Madiba, of course, found that very entertaining and humorous, of realizing, of course, that he studied the Afrikaner and he knew us very well because in order to negotiate with us, that was the prerequisite that he had to know our people, first of all. So he was used to the Afrikaner, and the experience also changed my dad in a great way. The morning after Madiba's passing, I tried to speak to my parents at about 4 o'clock in the morning, and my father was inconsolable. So that shows you the change in the human being. That he could be that sad about the passing of someone that you've spent a better part of your life, being negative about and having these prejudice and bias about. So it's an experience that really touched everyone.
Am I right in remembering that he did something with Madiba at Madiba's farms, planting trees or something? Was that right? Am I right?
Yes, he did.
That was in your first book, yeah?
But never mind. Yes, he did. Madiba asked me to find someone to plant trees in Punu. And, this white Afrikaans girl, where do I find someone in the Eastern Cape to plant trees? But it was quite a big project. He wanted the house shielded from the N2. And I asked my dad whether he knew of anyone or whether he could give me any advice. And a quote was obtained from professionals. And Madiba declined the quote, saying it was too expensive. And my dad then offered to do it, without claiming payment, but really, only claiming his expenses, which saved Madiba a considerable amount of money. Also, sourcing the trees from the growers and so on. And, one day we happened to be on the farm when my dad was now also, with the help of the community, planting trees. And I took a picture of this and I showed my dad and I said to him, times have really changed. Can you remember in 1990 when Nelson Mandela was released? You warned me against the terrorist and now you are working in his garden. And of course, my dad really enjoyed that. He did it with so much passion. And up to the last days of Madiba communicating with me, clearly, he would remind me, can you remember that your dad planted all those trees in Punu? So it was very special, a very special project.
And your dad working as the gardener also reminds me of one of your first interactions, maybe your very first, when you brought him a cup of tea. It was part of, you were a secretary in his office. You brought him tea, and that had some spin-offs, didn't it? Not all good.
Yes, no, not all good. It was on a documentary that was viewed across South Africa, that was called The Day in the Life of the President. And it was probably 1996, 97, I think. So early days in the new democracy. And friends of my parents saw this and said that they couldn't be friends with him any longer because their daughter serves tea to a black man. So that was very hurtful to my parents, because as I referred earlier, it was, despite their ideology, this is their child that you're speaking of, and there's already been some change in their hearts, and that was, very hurtful. So my parents were ostracized by many people in our community. But strangely, the impact of Nelson Mandela's legacy is so strong, Stuart, because at one of my motivational speeches a few years ago, the people that made these comments ended up being in the audience, knowing very well that my speech was going to be about my experiences with President Mandela. So it shows you, that impact of the legacy. It just had this ripple effect. One cannot say whether people changed completely, and I don't believe that we are ever completely changed as humans, but there was an impact. And the fact that they were there in the audience willing to listen shows you that there was definitely change in the right direction.
And you lost some of your friends as well for the same reasons, I guess.
Yes. They also, some of my friends, called me from early days, and that's why I'm so used to it now. They called me a sellout, and I'm working for this terrorist. And some of them came by, of course, that big unifying symbolism of Madiba in 1995 when he wore the Springbok jersey. Then people started saying, well, he's not that bad. And, so some of them came by, and, some people you're not just never going to be able to change. So it's the two sides of the same coin, I'd say.
There's so many things reading the book now that really had a deep impact on me, and I'm sure many of the people who will read it, but obviously on you too. I think about how he approached often difficult situations that we all have to face in our lives. Talk me through the Hansi Cronje incident. We all knew Hansi was our hero. I suspect most of us just simply could not believe that he could have been involved in the match fixing. But he asked you to set up a meeting with Hansi and his wife, Bertha.
Yes, because he wanted to reach out to him. I think that was, the early days of cancel culture. We call it cancel culture today. Hansi lost so many sponsorships, and he lost his circle of friends. No one wanted to be associated with him. People felt disappointed, and they felt betrayed by him. And, Madiba saw this from a distance, and then he announced that he wanted to see him and Bertha at Frankfurt when we were there for an Nelson Mandela Children's Fund event. And he told Hansi three very, very important things. The first thing he said was, my boy, you made a big mistake. Now, with Madiba using the term my boy, there was, immediately there was a close association that Madiba recognized. And then, the fact that he said to him, you've made a big mistake meant that, he acknowledged the mistake and not necessarily condoning the mistake. And then he said to him, and now you have to man up and face the consequences, meaning that there will be charges brought against you. As we all know from history, Hansi passed away before those charges were brought, but there would be consequences. And again, by Madiba verbalizing that, meant that he wanted him to understand that he's not going to try and interfere with that process because we are having tea. And the third but most important thing he said to him, but we'll be here on the other side. And this whole thing doesn't mean that we love you less. So it's Nelson Mandela really, accepting and acknowledging the complexity of human beings, that we all make mistakes, and saying to Hansi that you need to learn from your mistakes. You need to go through this process of the consequences that will be brought against you, the charges. And it doesn't mean, that we don't acknowledge you as a human being and for the good that you've done. Whereas today, we make up our minds about people based on what we read of them on social media. We cancel people instantaneously when they make a mistake. And Nelson Mandela acknowledged that we are all human beings with vices and virtues, and we need to deal with human beings with compassion and empathy, despite the mistakes that they make.
Very true. I'll tell you, I'll share a little story with you, which I don't imagine that you would have known about, but we got approached as an agency by the ad agency for Coca-Cola. And they said that they had a concept and they would love Hansi to appear in it. Could we speak on his behalf? So I contacted him and he said, well, then find out more. And he was still, very battered and bruised. And I said, maybe there's something in it. They then sent me the concept, and the concept was this simply. There were two little boys playing on what looked like a village cricket field, probably a school cricket ground. And there were cutaway shots of a grown-up sitting in the little stand reading his newspaper. Cutaway shots, the kids are playing, they can't play, they're messing around, and they come together in the middle and they say, let's go and ask the let's go ask him what we're doing wrong or right. And they walk up to him and he puts his newspaper down and walks onto the field with them. And the slogan, and it still gives me goosebumps today, was Coca-Cola is forgiveness. And it was at the time that I think the nation was by and large ready. It had been quite a long time after the whole incident broke. And I was talking to him, and the weekend of his fatal accident in that flight, he was coming to Joburg on the Monday. So he was flying back to Fancourt, coming to Joburg on the Monday, and we were going to meet with the agency and talk it through. And I said, don't take, you can't take any money for it. You should donate it to. And he was absolutely happy with the concept. And he really, who knows? It could have made a difference to his memory and his legacy. But we talk about social media. You had a real stormy brush with it, didn't you?
Yes, I did, Stuart. As you read in the book, but for those that haven't read the book, will remember that in 2015, I had a complete anger outburst on Twitter. It was called Twitter those days, and it had real repercussions for me. I chose very, very, or I used very badly chosen words in expressing myself. And the first rule about Twitter is never express yourself when you are angry. So, I did it in a moment without thinking. I lost complete focus of my association with Madiba. I was overtaken by anger, and it really, I was also cancelled, and people wrote opinion pieces, and, it was a terrible experience. But having come from that experience brought me to this book, because it also, people then posed the question to me, when they are nasty, they always say, have you learned nothing from Nelson Mandela? And I really had to go back and think, but what have I actually learned from him? And can I really process all of that? And that brought me to this beautiful book. So, it's there's nothing ever that happens in life is only good or bad. So, despite the damage at the time and my own internal struggle with it at the time, because emotionally and mentally it was a massive knock for me. Despite all of that, it brought some good, that I was able to sit down and really process this experience that I've had.
What would you say? How did Madiba view you in his life? Were you a granddaughter, a daughter, a part-time soulmate? I don't know. I don't even want to put words in your mouth. Tell us about that very special relationship, if you can.
I think, Stuart, look, he would say to me, he would introduce me, and then he would say to people, it's his honorary granddaughter. But I'm very respectful as well that he has real grandchildren, and, I don't want to move on that territory. So to me, he felt like a grandfather, but he was still my employer. So, and I took that very serious. And, there was a different kind of relationship because of the amount of time that we spent in each other's company. But I don't want to really label it other than saying that, I was a support to him. Madiba always knew that I had his interest at heart, and that that I will always put his needs first above my own, above that of anyone else. So, as I said to you, I don't want to really put a label, because I'm sure any kind of label will offend someone. But I know, that I was of support to him, and I dedicated the better part of 20 years of my life to him, and that was complete commitment. And whatever you want to describe that as, I'll leave that to other people to decide. But to me as well, he was emotionally, there was a tenderness in our relationship. He was an old soul. He was an elderly man, especially in his retirement, that needed a lot of support and help. And I'm very privileged that I was the one to provide that to him.
I guess he became your purpose in life, didn't he? I mean,
absolutely. No, absolutely. Stuart, you never know what's going to happen to your life. And I didn't expect to end up working for him. I didn't expect that he would choose me to work in retirement with him. None of that, I didn't have that kind of expectations of my life. But it then became a purpose, and I realized that my purpose is serving, being of assistance and being helpful in whatever ways, so many different ways as well. Today, after his passing, I've come to realize that as long as I follow that purpose of being, meaningful to someone else, even in a small way, by just acknowledging a human being and being kind and compassionate, that is really what I try to be for him as well.
I think you were incredibly sensitive. When I had professional dealings with you, I mean, there were times when you said, no, can't be done. And that's what made you a very efficient gatekeeper. But then there was also a time when you managed to arrange to change his diary for a recording with Tim Modise for Carte Blanche. And yeah, I'm sure you'll remember these kind of things. But he could get angry with you as well. I can remember still from the early days when you were late to get on the plane and they were all waiting.
Absolutely. And, we are slipping back in our old ways. When Madiba was alive, people knew that they had to be punctual because of who he was. And that's why this book, what Nelson Mandela taught me, is so important, because Nelson Mandela's lessons are relatable, but we need to be reminded of them. And yes, I was late for an aeroplane. Well, I wasn't really late. He was early that morning. And I arrived in the aeroplane, and he didn't even greet me. He just told me, that is the last time you were ever late. And from there on, for the following years, I made sure that I was punctual. He considered it a matter of respect, So I mean, when people say to him, "Oh, don't worry, it's just 5 minutes, it's African time," then he would say, "But there's no thing like African time. It is a matter of respect, being punctual." There's so many dimensions to today's life, Stuart. So, traffic, the incredible traffic, the traffic lights not working, it all contributes to our woes and us not being punctual. But even so, one should make a point of trying to be on time at least most of the time, because I think it's also a good character trait, and it reflects on leadership of people.
I remember him being very cross with Robert Mugabe, being late and disrupting a conference or something. And I remember Mark McCormack's words in What They Don't Teach You at Harvard. And he said he related a meeting that he had for which he'd had to start traveling 2 days prior. He got to the meeting in good time, and somebody who lived, a block or two away got there late. And I just remember thinking, we don't have the right. I mean, we owe it to somebody else, and there's nothing worse than being late, because now you're running, now you're building up a sweat. Get there early, have a coffee, read, do what you got to do. And that's a huge lesson. He knew exactly what he wanted. You talk about the incident, you mentioned the incident at the airport, where now he wanted to apologize to your dad for, and making you late and keeping him out. And he said he was going to have coffee, but I guess at 11 or whatever it was at night, there wasn't real coffee available. You broke into the kitchen, you got into the kitchen, you found some instant coffee, and he liked little espresso cups. So he knew what he wanted, and he liked his shoes set up in a particular way as well. Just to share that with us.
No, Stuart, I think the summary of all of that is really that he lived with intent. Everything that he did with intent. There was nothing loose about his life. Nothing tardy. What is the word I'm looking for? It was with intent. He lived by conviction, not convenience. Whereas I think it's for us, it's easier to live by convenience. And you sometimes just go with the flow and you make the best of the situation. But for Nelson Mandela, that didn't exist. Sometimes I would feel that I felt like he would, if he had a ruler with him or measure tape, he would make sure that the shoes were pointed in the right direction at the right angle, completely 100% in line. But that's a small way of showing you that whatever he did, even when it came to something just like putting his shoes next to one another, he did so with intent. His words were well chosen. He contemplated before speaking. So all of that really shows of the character of the person, and that's why he's so relatable as a leader. That's why he's believable still today as a leader, because even in his small actions, you could see, what his principles and values and morals were, and he lived by those every single day.
Going to wrap up. I want to ask you, if you hadn't met him back then, how different might you have been today? Is it possible to fathom?
Yeah, I do. I can do that. Where I am now in my life, and this is 30 years after democracy, where I am now, I see a society as a whole, and not only in South Africa, across the world, people slipping back to their own ways. If it had not been for Madiba's impact on my life, I think it would have been very easy for me to slip back in my own way, in my old ways, or not change. I mean, the exposure that he gave me, the things that I've seen in my life, the things that I've experienced in my life, it's immeasurable what kind of impact that had on my life. So I look back at a 24-year-old walking through that office door, and a racist young women, so inexperienced. And I think to myself, racism isn't something that you always do. Racism is a way of thinking. And, as I say, you will never be completely changed as a human being. You'll fight your prejudice and your bias every single day, just like Madiba fought his. And looking back at that 24-year-old, that person is almost unrecognizable because of his influence. Had it not been for his influence, I'm not sure it would have been that easy to change. Things may have been, I may have seen the light, 10 years ago or whatever, but I don't think I would have progressed and evolved as a human had it not been for his impact.
That's powerful stuff. When you're not on stages all around the world speaking about his legacy and your association with him, are you still doing some of the stuff you used to do, the Bikers for Change?
No, I had to leave Bikers for Mandela Day for various reasons, yes, Stuart, but I still do charity work in my community. I help where I can. I live now in a coastal town called Hermanus. I'm sure everyone knows where that is. So I help around the area where I can, whenever there's something, that people put to me, where I can accommodate it. I try to do that, not in a structured way. I'm also a board member of the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation, so that keeps me connected to politics and to the inside information of things. And as an activist, it keeps me going, and I really, really enjoy that and the robust conversations we can have, because that's something that I've lost contact with, since Madiba's passing. So I really enjoy that too. And yes, the rest of my life, I live close to nature. I've got two beautiful French bulldog puppies called Shay and Eva, named after Shay Kouavara and Eva Perron. And I spend my time with them as much as possible and walk them every morning, and just taking in nature and trying to live a different kind of life where I contemplate things, where I'm removed from the busy life of the 19 years and the anxiety that surrounded me and the pressure and the stress and so on. So trying to now, in these years of my life, trying to find balance to all of that.
You sound a bit, in a way, like Tuli Madonsela, Prof. Madonsela. We had a lovely conversation a little while ago. She also just loves to commune with nature and just breathe and forget the real world. Maybe the stress-free time now, you've earned it. You don't have to hide anybody's newspaper anymore. And I'm so delighted that you've written your new book. And thank you for your time. And we look forward to working with you soon.
Thank you so much, Stuart. Just in closing, perhaps to say, because of your reference to Advocate Madonsela, Madiba always said to me, or sometimes he would say to me, I miss prison. And then I would say to him, you can't say that, don't let people hear you say something like that. And then he would laugh at me and say, no, what he meant is that he missed time to think. And, with this fast-paced world in which we live, where our smartphones have taken over our lives, very few of us actually sit sometimes just for 10 minutes and think about your problems without just looking at your screen. And I find that, as the advocate also said, if you are in nature and you have no choice but to look around you and not being on your phone, that you see things differently. So I hope people can be encouraged, to do that, and also take a minute just to come up with better solutions if they do something simple like that. Thank you for your time, Stuart. I really appreciate it, and I hope we see each other soon.
I'm sure we will, and then you can sign your book.
Absolutely. Thank you, and thanks for reading.